workshop. Oh, there it is. Welcome to our workshop on storytelling and the language of invasive species outreach. Raising awareness about invasive species and encouraging behavior change is vital for addressing invasive species issues. Engaging the public through education and outreach can sometimes be a challenge. So our goal today is to provide some tools to help you better connect and communicate with the public, but these tools can also be useful for improving how any of us communicate with the public. Communicate about invasive species, sorry. We'll be exploring both the art of storytelling and how to frame invasive species language in a way that reduces cultural biases, racism, and exclusionary concepts. If any questions come up through the workshop, please enter them into the chat and we will address them at the end. This event is part of the 11th annual New York Invasive Species Awareness Week, also known as NYSA, which runs June 3rd through June 9th this year. And all week long, events are being held across the state to raise awareness about invasive species. And our virtual workshop kicks off the NYSA webinar series, which includes daily webinars today through Friday. And to find out more about this series and about other events near you, you can scan the QR code on the screen here or visit this link. So I want to start by sharing a little bit about us. I'm Rachel Taylor, Community Science and Engagement Program Manager for West New York PRISM. Christy Sabins is the Stewardship Communications Coordinator for Lower Hudson PRISM. Megan Pistole-Shaw is the Education, Outreach, and Communications Coordinator for St. Lawrence Eastern Lake Ontario PRISM. And Cassidy Robinson is the Education and Outreach Manager for Long Island PRISM. So although our job titles and work locations differ, we have quite a bit in common. First of all, a major component of all our jobs is invasive species education and outreach, which means we communicate and engage with the public regarding invasive species issues on pretty much a daily basis. Second, our organizations help make up what is known as the New York State PRISM Network, which is coordinated with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. As illustrated in this map, there are 8 PRISMs across the state, and PRISM stands for Partnerships for Regional Invasive Species Management. Each PRISM is funded by the New York State Environmental Protection Fund through a contract with the New York State DEC in coordination with various host organizations. And each PRISM is a coordinated group of organizations and community members working together to prevent the spread of and manage invasive species. So now that you know a little bit about us and what we do, let's go over what we have planned for you today. First, Christy will be giving an overview of what storytelling that motivates change looks like, and we'll provide some really helpful tips to go along with this. And then after that, Megan and Cassidy will discuss how language of invasive species is used in storytelling and how that can be improved by considering the cultural impacts of the words we use. And then it'll be time for all of you to bring out your inner storyteller and put what you've learned into practice. So first up, we have storytelling with Christy.
Thank you, Rachel. Good afternoon, everybody. So let's just dive right in. Why is storytelling so important in our field? Well, the scientific world can be intimidating for those who are not a part of it. And data doesn't always elicit the emotional response we're looking to elicit. So a story allows us to tell an event in such a way that the listener experiences or learns something just by the fact that they heard the story. It's a way of transferring information and experience, attitude, or point of view. And all of this informs and inspires people to connect with and act for, in our case, nature or the environment, allowing us to think about the environment from different perspectives. Next. So that being said, what makes a good story? So this is sort of tapping into your elementary school self. You want to think of the who, what, why, how, when, where, that's a lot of things of your story to make it compelling, but you want to make sure that it's simple. Simple stories are strong stories. So let me rephrase that. It's the 5 W's. It's the who, what, where, why, and when, even though in this graphic it says how. So we want to have our character, the who, the conflict, the what, why, and the change. And so this way, readers can put themselves into a story, and that makes them more likely to change their opinions. Also, storytelling is an opportunity to give your work a positive spin. So often working with invasive species has a negative connotation, the doom and gloom effect. You may be familiar with that. When you're a storyteller, when you are the storyteller, you can tell the positive version of the tale, demonstrating that there's hope for the future and that progress is being made. Next. So here's an example. With every story, you start from scratch. Imagine this scenario. You're out in the field with a crew who's managing various invasive species. You may view this as a typical workday, but what angle is there that would engage the public? How can we get emotions involved? And how does this work impact the bigger picture? Next. So you have to start by asking yourself some key questions, or those around you some key questions. Who are the key players? What are they doing? How are they doing it? How does this relate to the audience? Do you have all of the facts? And how can you make this digestible? And this is why it's important to talk to those involved on the scene. If you're not the resident expert, then you need to get the facts straight so you make sure that the audience gets the proper information. Next. All right, so here's our first example. Today, the Invasives crew teamed up with Rye Nature Center to manage a selection of invasive species. The crew helped with infestations of wisteria and silkgrass, as well as stands of tree of heaven. So what's missing? First of all, obviously, this is pretty boring. And also, some things aren't very clear. Who is the Invasives crew? Why are they doing this work? What are these species and why do they matter? Also, we currently have no emotions involved with this. So you also want to make sure that you gather those firsthand accounts, talk to the people on the scene, get the facts. How much are they managing? Why are they managing it? Make it personal. Don't make it strictly factual if you can add some pizzazz. So what can we do to add to this? Next. So it's not just about the facts, it's about emotion. Let me read this and you tell me how this engages the reader. Clearing the way for native species to return. Today, the Invasives crew teamed up with Rye Nature Center to manage the selection of invasive species on their property. The crew helped with infestations of wisteria and stiltgrass, pictured doing what they do best, overtaking the forest floor as dense monocultures, as well as stands of tree of heaven. The crew already assisted in removing over 1,300 pounds of stiltgrass just yesterday. By managing these invasive species, the hope is to make room for native species to flourish in these areas once again. So in these image examples, I don't have the photo of the dense monocultures I did earlier, but you, just as a side note, you want to make sure your imagery lines up with your story because you want to paint that picture. In this caption, we explain how the work benefits our ecosystems and our own well-being. We touch on data that exemplifies just how much of an impact this work is making. The bottom line, we want to draw the reader in with what they know. People, if anything, understand that native species versus invasive species, or understand that difference, so touch on that. And don't go it alone. Get information from your colleagues, ask for help, and get the facts straight. And make sure to ask the crew in this situation how many pounds of stiltgrass they manage. Also, elaborate on topics for the layman. Not everyone is at the same level of you, the same level of understanding as you. Make sure all of the information is correct and that every interested party is credited, in this case, our crew and the Rye Nature Center. This is also important for expanding your reach. If you include the collaborative work of others, they are likely to share it with their audiences as well. Next. So, what are some example stories that you can craft if you're ever scratching your head and wondering, what on earth am I going to write about? There's always the creation story. How did the organization form? What are its roots? What's your purpose? The impact story, sort of like what we just went over. How is your organization making a difference in the actual lives of the community or the ecosystem of the community? The people story, what are the personal stories of the people running the organization and what drives them to do this work? This is your chance to interview your staff, your volunteers, the public in general, ask them some questions, get their perspectives, adding that emotional element, that personal element. And then the recovery story, sharing a time when your organization or you faced a major challenge and how you recovered. This gives insight into like in a challenge, and it shows vulnerability and authenticity, which are very important things in storytelling. Next. So we went over the importance of the verbal or the written word. So let's discuss the importance of visualization and the tools you can learn. Even if you're not a professional photographer or you've never touched a camera in your life, every device at this point has some sort of camera on it. So whether you like it or not, it is your opportunity to be the pseudo photographer. So also, you get to be creative and experiment. Don't be afraid. Take risks. Capture multiple shots. Learn what your camera can do, or your device in this case. Try different angles. Avoid digital zoom, which is when you zoom into things with your fingers. Use portrait mode. Just play around and see what you can capture with what the tools that you have available to you. Next. There's my dog. So as I was saying, you want to try different perspectives. The things you want to remember, or the three things you want to remember, are to get a close, a medium, and a long shot. Variety is the spice of life. You want to get a close up shot to capture the details of your subject. The medium shot captures the subject as a whole. And then the long shot captures the scene. Where is your subject? What are they doing? It puts context around your subject. Don't be afraid to get up close and personal with your subject to get detailed shots. Step back for a shot that establishes who or what your subject is, and get a wide angle to set the scene. These are just the three shots you can remember when you're in a scenario where you're trying to capture a story. Try to get that variety, and then you'll be able to tell that better, more full-fledged story in the end. Next. Another fun tip, an easy tip, is to use the rule of thirds when you're taking photos. And this applies to video too. I know everything is video now, so you may as well apply that too. So why the rule of thirds? This draws the viewer's eye into the composition instead of just glancing at the center. By placing the subject off center in one of these crosshairs, thus the rule of thirds, you're also embracing more blank space, and it's helpful for highlighting an interesting background. In this case, this is that long shot, as we were talking about. It puts the subject in the scene. It tells the story of where they are, what they're doing to some extent without any words. And basically each intersection point is a potential point of interest. You could, of course, put your subject in the center. That doesn't mean you can never put your subject in the center of a photograph. This is just a quick and easy way to make your images a little more interesting if you're just like on the fly taking some pictures. Try to put it off center and get a little bit more of the background in to tell more of a story. Next. As I was touching on, you can also play with video. So this is your opportunity to show your organization in action, or yourself in action, whoever in action. When you're out in the field, capture video clips of your, for social media or for longer form videos down the line. This is also a chance to interview people on the scene and get them actually speaking to the camera. You could also just incorporate quotes in your caption, but this lets your audience hear the voice of your organization, and it allows volunteers to offer their own stories and perspectives. And the bottom line is to have fun. You want to play with the different things let's say your device in this situation can do. You want to try those different angles, those interesting angles. Slow-mo is always fun, before and afters. You could also play with narration if you're that kind of a person and you like to narrate things versus be on camera. And yeah, basically, I'm all for having fun and taking risks and seeing what you can come up with when you let those creative juices start flowing. Next. That being said, whether you're capturing video, photos, or writing a story, or all three, you need to know your audience. You need to know where and how you share matters. You have to learn how the people interact with you on different platforms, whether it's social media, whether it's on your website or newsletter or your YouTube channel, wherever you're putting this content out there. You want to make sure that the messaging is clear, and you make an effort to connect with your audience by sharing and engaging with them. If someone comments or asks questions, do your best to follow up with them, be interactive, have those high quality images so people are interested and very engaged with your content. And you want to get to know your audience. Your audience comprises individuals from all walks of life, cultures and backgrounds, and you don't want to offend or alienate anyone. And that brings us into the next section of this presentation with Megan and Cassidy.
Thank you so much. Communication is vital to invasive species outreach. However, some of the words and the messaging commonly used to describe invasive species can be viewed as offensive and therefore hinders our ability to effectively communicate with our audience. Over the next few slides, we'll consider the cultural impacts of the words used to describe invasive species. And I'd just like to note that some of these concepts were provided by Lee Greenwood and Nancy Olmsted with the Nature Conservancy, who have been sharing information on this topic with the PRISM network. Many common names for invasive species include geographic or cultural words, such as Japanese knotweed or gypsy moth, and the use of such words can be considered offensive to individuals from the same origin or ethnic background to which that name refers to. However, in New York State, there is an existing naming structure in use through the New York State DEC Prohibited and Regulated Invasive Species Lists and NY IMAP invasives. The common names on these lists are also tied to the language used in the New York State Invasive Species Regulation, Part 575 law, and the IMAP invasives reporting platforms. Therefore, it's important to use the current common names on these lists to avoid confusion. However, many common names used for invasive species may change as conversations surrounding this issue evolve. There's a great article by Suzanne Goldsmith featured by the Nature Conservancy surrounding the movement to rename species. The article highlights recommendations from professionals in multiple fields of biology to consider naming species after their physical attributes or habitat rather than after people. This concept of renaming species has been undertaken by the Entomological Society of America, who launched the Better Common Names Project in 2021, which aims to identify and change offensive names and derogatory terms used to describe insects. You can actually participate in this project, and we'll provide a link to it in a follow-up email, or you can just search for it by name online. The first insect to be renamed through the Better Common Names Project was the spongy moth, whose former common name used a racial term for the Romani people. The new name, spongy moth, focuses on the characteristics of the species, referring to the spongy texture of its egg masses. Additionally, the American Ornithological Society announced in November of 2023 that they plan to change the English common names of all American birds that memorialize people or are deemed offensive or exclusionary. The process began this year and will focus initially on 70 to 80 birds found in the United States or Canada. New names are expected to focus on bird characteristics and habitat.
Thanks, Megan. So in addition to naming, terms and messaging styles commonly used in invasive species outreach can be problematic. Many of us have likely heard or even used some of the terms listed on this slide, like war on weeds, uninvited invader, or eradicate. Warlike words, fear-mongering, and combative messaging further amplify negative cultural impacts. We'll get a little more into that. These terms can be harmful because using warlike or militaristic terms implies malintent of the species or people in the country or region of origin of that invasive species. This contributes to xenophobia and racism, as the negative impacts of that invasive species can be unintentionally conflated with those cultures and groups, especially when common names reference them, as in the case of Asian murder hornet or Japanese barberry. Problematic language can also oversimplify invasive species ecology in several ways. By negative language shifting the blame to organisms and vilifying them, all the while ignoring our role in their introduction and facilitating factors that have led to their success. Additionally, the focus on non-native or non-indigenous species can imply that all such species are harmful, which is false and ignores the nuance of non-invasive introduced species as compared to invasives. As I mentioned, there are facilitating factors that lead to the spread of invasive species. We create opportunities for invasive species to thrive, whether intentionally or unintentionally. Some of the ways we do this are through intentional introductions of ornamental plants or the pet trade, and disturbing ecosystems and altering environments in a way that makes them vulnerable to invasive species establishment. For example, invasive species are more likely to establish in the presence of other invasive species in environments affected by deer browse and in fragmented or otherwise disturbed or degraded habitats. We must acknowledge our role and agency in contributing to invasive species issues so we can work towards more effective invasive communication and management. We realize that we're all learning about these concepts and that it will take time to come to a consensus on new common names and messaging techniques. So here are a few things to avoid and best practices you can apply moving forward. Avoid words that are offensive or promote negative emotional reactions. Instead, use words that reduce negativity and elevate your mission. Focus on the positive, like Christy was mentioning, and acknowledge the role people play in spreading invasive species and avoid blaming the organism. So now we'll work on putting these concepts into practice. We're going to do a little ad-lib activity, improving some problematic invasive species phrases. All right. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Thanks. So here's our first activity. You can join by web by going to pollev.com, this website up top, or join by text, Happy Marsh 623, or text that to 22333, or you can scan the QR code. And this is our first challenge once you have joined to improve the problematic phrase, attack the invasive oriental bittersweet that's killing our trees. And you can add and embellish this as you see fit. So I'll give you guys a minute to do that, and then we'll share some responses. Just realized I might not be able to scroll, so maybe I should start reading some of these off. Oh, there we go. Protect your urban forests by removing invasive bittersweet plants and planting native species. That's great. Help us manage non-native bittersweet. Protect habitat for our native trees. Removing brown bittersweet to promote native species. I like these alternate common names and focusing on the positive effects. Help protect our forest by preventing the spread. Manage to protect trees. How to remove, that's a good idea. Explain the technique instead of just tell people what to do, instead of telling people what they should be doing. Allow native trees to flourish. Great. These are great. All right, so we have a couple more examples. We will move on to our second. All right, next is don't dump bait. Eradicate silver carp to stop the invasion of our waters. Same deal. And you shouldn't have to rejoin if you're already in the poll. Protect our waterways by properly disposing of your bait. Help protect the waters you love by disposing of bait properly. I like that. Silver carp can be accidentally introduced through by. I don't know what that is. Maybe it's a fishing term I'm not familiar with. Bait. Must be bait. So dispose of unused bait. That's good. Protect your favorite waterways by not dumping bait. Doing so can introduce invasive species. Use native bait. That's a good one. help keep our waters clean by not releasing leftover bait, protect natural waters and the habitats they hold by practicing care in waste management, can all restore native fish habitat if we're careful not to leave bait and other materials in waterways. Great. These are all great responses. I'm sensing some common themes. And with that, we'll go on to our last example. So improve this phrase. Foreign invaders are ruining our forests and harming wildlife. Same deal. Support native wildlife by growing native plants. Help protect your forests and local wildlife. Keep an eye out for invasive species. Native species provide better habitat for wildlife and improve our biodiversity. Great. Introduce species, plants, and animals that are not native to our region can disrupt, disturb, and displace our native native species. Discover how you can make a difference in protecting our ecosystems, prevent the spread by practicing play, clean, go. That's great. Very actionable. Some non-native species are crowding out native species that have evolved to flourish in our ecosystems over thousands of years. That's great, explaining the competition that invasive species pose. Forest and wildlife need protection from non-native invasive species. Be careful what you plant. Threaten our forests and native wildlife. Planting natives. Species that have not evolved with our native species can cause great harm to our native ecosystems and do not contribute to the success of our local flora and fauna. Great. All great responses. Thanks for playing. And with that, I will turn it back over to Rachel to move on to our next activity.
Okay, everyone. So now that you've had a little practice, it's time to bring out your inner storyteller. And the objective of this is going to be to work in a group to create a story that raises awareness of an invasive species while considering the ways to avoid problematic naming or messaging. Everyone's going to be divided into 4 breakout rooms, and one of the hosts will be in each room and we'll provide the scenarios, help facilitate, and keep track of time. Each scenario includes an invasive species, an audience, and a theme. So you want to keep that theme in mind when you're crafting your story. Some of these scenarios have a free choice where you can choose what to fill in. And then, so once you get in the breakout room, each group is gonna choose a scenario, and then you're gonna have 10 minutes to build a digestible short story, so like 4 to 5 sentences. And then if you have time left, you can feel free to create additional stories using the other scenarios that we provided. And then once the time is up, we'll all return here, where each group will share their story, and then we'll offer some feedback. So I'm going to go ahead and open all the rooms. Everyone got their story ready. We can start with room 1.
Okay. We didn't get to assign somebody to share it because we were so deep in all the ideas. But I'll just say what we were able to capture. I put it in the chat too. Thank you to group number 1 for all of your great ideas. Attention anglers, have you seen this plant? Avoid walking through it to get to your favorite fishing spot, as it can easily be spread, covering entire riparian areas. Also, don't bring it home with you, as it can take over your yard and even damage your home.
Good. So our situation was our species was Asian carp. The audience was a boater or an angler, and the theme was general education. So we had a nice hook to get them in. Been fishing since 1970, so has the invasive carp. The invasive carp threatens the health and populations of our native fish species due to its explosive population growth. This reduces the populations of native fish and impacts I lost my place. Impacting your experience as an angler by limiting the number of fish you're interested in. You can help protect the fishery and waterways you love by using certified bait and by reporting any sightings you see.
Nice.
I love the tagline.
Yes, we thank you, Group 2, for your creativity.
Okay, next up we have room 3.
All right, I'll read this off for group 3. Boaters, are you enjoying your clean waterways today? Keep them clean by being aware of water milfoil. Your Asian milfoil can shade out native plants, but moving to different bodies of water, it's best to remove any stragglers as they can easily grow in other lakes. Remove milfoil from your boat before you go somewhere new. Great job, group 3.
That's awesome.
We had a lot of fishing things going on today.
Yeah, it's really funny. They're all fishing. All right, I have a volunteer from our group, Chris, who's going to be reading ours from room 4.
Native sport fish like largemouth bass rely on underwater plants to live and breed. Invasive plants like frogbit spread and cover the water surface, reducing the light reaching the plants underwater. Largemouth bass nest on the floor of water bodies like ponds and lakes, so overcrowding of frogbit and other non-natives could impact their breeding abilities. Clean, drain, and dry to keep fishing fun. And don't dump garden, pond, or aquarium plants.
Yeah, that was great.
Excellent.
I had a question for group 1. What was the species? It's not in the story.
Oh, it's Japanese knotweed. So we
Okay,
like to use
okay.
the phrase invasive knotweeds to
Oh,
actively
I-
be talking about all of them instead of using the word Japanese. That's what the group decided.
okay. I just don't see that in the text. It says attention anglers. Or am I looking at the wrong thing?
Oh, you are. It's just it didn't make its way in there, but that's what
Oh,
we're
okay.
talking about. We
Okay.
were in the middle of polishing, and then we got put it back
Yeah.
out here.
Okay. Well, that was the only feedback I had.
10 minutes wasn't long enough. If we do this again,
No, it
we need 15. It took us a while just to figure out which scenario we wanted to do.
What we did it. Everybody did it. So great job, everybody.
We would have a nice picture to go with our story. And the rules of 3.
Oh, okay, if anyone else has any other feedback, otherwise, we'll just continue on. Okay. Alrighty, so here is our list of references. Well, before, just thanks again, everybody. That was really great. Great job putting together those stories. That was really wonderful. Here we have our list of the references that were mentioned earlier. These are great resources for learning more and getting involved. And we'll be providing these in an email to everyone who registered, so you don't have to write these all down. And we just want to thank you all for joining us today. And we'd love it if you could take the NYSOF feedback survey by scanning the QR code on the screen. And we'll take some questions. I don't think there were any questions, but let me just see in the chat. If anybody has any questions, you can add them into the chat right now. And we'd be happy to answer them. I'll just give a few moments here in case anyone has anything. Oh, you can win a prize by taking the feedback survey. Okay, we had a question here. Is there a list of name switches available?
think what they mean is instead of one name, use the other. I'm assuming.
Yes,
Is
so
that-
you mentioned like not wanting to use Oriental bittersweet. So is there a list of name substitutions because people are not familiar with the new names that people would like to use, and where can we find them? Is there a one pager so that we could use the correct terms?
At this time in New York State, we're asking folks to use the names that are on the New York State regulated and prohibited lists and IMAP invasives lists. So right now there isn't a current, substitution for common names of species, but there's a conversation going on. And we gave some examples of what some other organizations are pursuing in regard to changing names, but right now, because of the, those regulated lists and whatnot, we're asking folks to continue to use those names.
Good question. Thanks, Megan. I have another question here. Is there a difference between using the phrase invasive versus non-native? Yes. So invasive is a species that's non-native to the ecosystem, and it causes a negative impact to either the environment, the economy, or human health. And so just because a species is not native doesn't mean that it's invasive. So that would be what the difference is with that. Okay. Another comment that there's alternative common names in Wikipedia pages as well. Okay, thank you. Is there any other questions? Okay, I have a question. With climate change and changing phenology regarding native plant species and their possible elimination, is there a place for some non-natives to replace them? Anyone want to take a stab at that?
Are you
can try.
asking? Oh, go ahead, Cassie.
Oh, do you want to take it?
No, you can take it.
Sometimes, while invasive species are not typically providing the same exact resources as native species, specifically thinking about plants and native, like host insects that have evolved with those native plants over time, that relationship won't typically be there with invasive plants, for example. But invasives can sometimes fill niches of providing structure in a habitat, such as for shrub nesting birds or other generalist insects to feed on the nectar and things like that. So there can be some benefits and hypothetical like replacement of those, but it won't be an exact replacement for the native species. And there are also, with climate change, native species making gradual migrations into northern climates. And sometimes people will be assisting those to kind of facilitate a faster movement of species that would have naturally possibly happened over time.
Yeah, that's a good question. And then, yeah, another climate change and invasives concern that someone shared, species that are present but not yet invasive can become so with climate change. And then Megan shared a link for the, okay, perfect. I think everybody can see that. That has resources related to those questions about climate change and invasive species. So
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
a guide that the Northeast Regional Invasive Species and Climate Change Management Network, or RISC. We really like our acronyms in this professional field. But anyway, they have a great guide, and I'll include that in the follow-up email that kind of gives a rundown on this whole concept of climate change and the progression of the species.
any other questions? We still have a few minutes left here. 6 minutes.
Have you considered any stories related to challenges with invasive species that you've overcome to tell recovery stories?
Can you rephrase that one more time? I feel like I can answer
So
this question.
one of the types of stories that you had was recovery. And
Yeah.
as you know, there are challenges with invasive species management. Have you shared or kind of been considering stories about how the PRISMs are overcoming challenges to invasive species management?
Sure, I'll chime in. Something that came to mind for me just now is in our region, beech leaf disease is a huge problem and very unfortunate. If you're unfamiliar, beech leaf disease affects our beech trees and ultimately ends in mortality. And there's no known cure currently, or at least a well used one. So that is a very doom and gloom situation when you first look at it, thinking about canopy loss and opening up the forest floor for invasives to just rush in because it's just a clean slate for them. So we did a recovery story it'll be a long form or a long-term recovery, of course, but we did a story on installing deer fences, like deer exclusion fences, where beech leaf disease was progressing in these beech stands. And this allows for those saplings and for the native species that would grow without deer browse, because there was this heavy deer browse. And this allows that area to kind of flourish once again. And so in other words, I'm hoping this answers your question. This is just an example of, it's like, it seems like this negative thing, but we're kind of angling it to be a positive spin to say, while we are losing our beech trees in this area, we are allowing our other native species like tulip tree and maples and sassafras, not sassafras. I'm losing whatever the species I'm thinking of, and I can't think of it right now. But maybe it is sassafras. Anyways, so that is hopefully answering your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? Great question so far.
Also, if you have any follow-up questions that I know like Zoom is kind of can be like overwhelming in terms of like you have questions after the fact, you can email any one of us, or Megan's going to send that follow-up email. Feel free to contact us after the fact too, and we'd be happy to help you.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, okay. If no one else has any questions, okay. Perfect. Yeah, thanks everybody for joining us. And don't forget to tune in to tomorrow's webinar at 1 p.m. on IMAP Invasives data collection for community scientists. And thank you all again, and we hope to see you at another event this week.
Happy nice.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you.